Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 161. And this episode's a little different because we just got back from PAX Unplugged. And normally when we come back from a convention, when we talk about it in an episode, it becomes its own unnumbered special. But given that PAX Unplugged is a tabletop convention and Matt and I cover video games, it's already a little unconventional, but once we went there, we found that there was a lot of really cool adaptations of video games into board games, because there have been plenty of board games and tabletop games converted into video games, and that's a topic for a future episode because there are some really interesting highs and lows and conveniences there. But Matt and I were kind of fascinated by some of the reverse adaptations that we got to see.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about our broad thoughts about PAX Unplugged here at the top, but ultimately we wanted to chat about how these things convert and if they do it well. We were lucky enough to have a leg up that not long before we left for the convention, we got an email from the PR representing a brand new Sonic board game that we're going to talk about more in a little bit. And we were like, oh, hey, that would be a good centerpiece for this kind of a topic. Especially with something as long-running as Sonic, you have a ton of material to work from. But all in all, PAX Unplugged was really a great event and has become one of my favorite conventions because it's a lot lower pressure, less hectic. It can get pretty busy on the Saturday still, but because a lot of the convention is based around demoing board games, which just tend to run longer than, say, your typical video game demo in my experience, I have found that there are less folks walking the floor because there are a lot more folks playing games, and there is a whole back section just to play board games more broadly. Other conventions have that as well, and there are those spaces. There is TTRPG stuff and tabletop stuff at the other PAXs,
Of course,
but they're not the focus like they are here, and I think it makes for a kind of more relaxed vibe most of the time.
Yeah, I think so. The first time that Sarah and I went to Gen Con a number of years ago, it was our first tabletop gaming convention after going to either Comic-Con or other gaming conventions. And the idea of sitting down at a booth for the next 20 to, 40 minutes even, and play test a game, learn how it goes, go through some phases of the game. You're sitting the whole time. That kind of pace felt completely ridiculous to us. We felt over-caffeinated, kind of anxious and antsy about it, but that's the way that it goes, and that is just the nature of that style of play. And PAX Unplugged is a great object study in that when you compare it to the other PAXs, because there's just as many booths with just as many new and upcoming games and established companies and cool people wanting you to come and check it out and to share it with you. But board games typically don't make a lot of noise, and they are usually veer more towards the solo play, maybe head-to-head. So maybe you put it up on a big screen, maybe you have something like that, but at something like PAX Unplugged, if you're walking around and someone's trying out the game, the line situation is a little different. It's not single file. You can kind of poke your head over someone's shoulders and see what the game looks like. You're hearing the explanation as it happens, and you're not watching somebody try to parse out how this game works as they play it. The idea that you periodically can, and honestly should, sit down sometimes and try out the game for whatever length of time that is, it makes for a very different pace. And given that Matt and I both love and enjoy card games, board games, tabletop RPGs, all manner of games like that, we tend more towards video games just in general. And so it feels like, like going out to the country, certainly for me.
No, for sure. And I mean, I'm someone who grew up always playing board games. I have a ton of board games at home. I have lovely friends, some who get shout out on this podcast pretty regularly, who I play board games with all the time. And for the most part, when we play board games, they're not about video games. Sometimes they're oeuvre could be connected to the kinds of things we see in video games. But for the most part, they're not directly connected. And what was fun about this trip also, besides kind of keeping an eye out for video game-based board games specifically, which was a fun thing for my spouse Sarah to do. The first day we were on the con floor, every 20 minutes or so, I'd get a text with a photo of another board game based on a video game. Because our mutual friend Chris that they were walking around with would go, that's a video game, that's a video game, that one's a video game. And so that was fun as well to engage that way. I haven't been to PAX Unplugged in 2 years. Last year we weren't able to go. And there were games that were only being demoed or like only had like the playtest version out that then had the full release versions that we got to see. Like there was a fun dim sum board game that I'm forgetting the name of at this moment, but how it plays is you have to consume as much dim sum as possible. And if you've ever been to get dim sum, most of the time the dumplings and everything else are in these like little like wicker baskets that have stackable pieces that you can remove to see more. And they made their game pieces to be like that were stackable and had these little rubber food pieces. It was just very cool. And like I found with board games more than other things, the tactile feel of the game is kind of almost as important as the game being fun. When we get into some of the specifics later, some of the figures and pieces, like them being really high quality, just kind of make brain go burr a little bit, right? Like you just enjoy that in a way that I don't know that I can compare to other games of any kind, really. And that kind of was a thing I really realized this year when we were walking the floor.
Yeah, and to give it the proper details, the name of the game is Steam Up, A Feast of Dim Sum.
There we go.
And I felt something similar with a game that, honestly, big flex, isn't even on Kickstarter yet, but they already have prototype pieces, and it was such a delightful experience, a game called Punch Bowl that was about making the perfect punch at a garden party, essentially. The quality of the cards they printed out reminds me of these TV trays that my grandparents had that have like the gold foil around the edges or something to make it look like it, and the very artful watercolors of fruit on black backgrounds, like velvet painting style. And it was evocative and colorful and cool. And again, food pieces, make it look as good enough to eat, but don't eat it kind of thing. And it's actually kind of funny to think about how as video games go more and more digital, with the physical releases being almost deluxe editions or prestige releases, tabletop games kind of have to go the opposite direction, because to fight against, well, why am I doing this and not just playing it on my phone? You have to have the better pieces. And there's always like a standard and then the collector's edition, deluxe edition. And at these conventions, they're of course showing you the deluxe edition. And I don't blame them. I want to play all of them now. That's the goal. But in order to improve on that, you can't improve the graphics, as it were, on a board game as you would for a AAA video game title. So yeah, the models are higher quality. And I think that also is probably something to do with as you get more independent creators doing 3D printings or doing paintings or doing anything like that, people are able to more ably connect with other independent creators to make these high quality pieces and not be a major company. So that's sort of the, I guess, indie tabletop studios going into the higher quality direction of their market for physical pieces, because that's what they have to do, because that is, certainly as we're looking at it, the nature of tabletop gaming.
For sure. Also, I think it's really great about PAX Unplugged is that you can, if you have a prototype version of your game, you can add it to the pool of games that you can kind of rent and play in the play area. And I saw many people like playing non-final versions, and then there are like feedback cards and other things. And I think that's really interesting as well, this idea that you can really get your idea out there. I don't want to say it's impossible to do that with video games, but for sure, with a board game, you could just have a couple of like printed cards that you cut up from like printer paper and like wrote on and then brought them in and like, this is the game, here's how you play it. I think there is an even more DIY nature to board games versus video games, which get more DIY every year. But I think there's just something kind of low tech about board games that is really interesting.
Yeah. You can do a rules change on the fly as you're playtesting it, going, okay, that's broken. Let's start a new round, and this time that card has a hard limit on how much power it can gain or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can write it out on index cards or whatever, whereas in a digital environment, you've got to change code. You've got to run a patch. You've got to do any of those. And those can create more spectacular results. But yeah, being able to bring a small box with your game design for a board game, for a card game, for a tabletop RPG, that's going to work far more one-to-one, more maneuverable in your updates and in your playtesting. I remember, I think it was Comic-Con, or no, it was Gen Con. There is a sort of like a board game crowdfunding site, Game on Tabletop, that lets you take some cards, take some little minis, maybe a dice or two, and create a game. And I'll be damned if I didn't really like the game that I created. I may go back to it one day and just fiddle around with it. If nothing else, I really liked the theming of it because it was a one-on-one card game about divorced parents trying to one-up each other at their child's birthday party, even if it kills the entertainment. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That kind of spirit, that's the indie DIY, game jam, whatever spirit for board games, for analog gaming, as it were.
Yeah, and I think that we were really lucky in the fact that there were even more video game-based board games than we could cover. We're going to talk more about Kess a little later, who are the ones making the Sonic Roll board game. But they've made a Contra board game and a Mega Man board game, both of which we wanted to play test and didn't have a chance to. There was a Stellaris board game that looked really cool and really complicated, unsurprisingly. Besides just having to license a thing, which can be a pain in the ass on its own, trying to like find a way to make something feel like a video game, whether it plays exactly like a video game, like some of the games we played, or just has the vibes of it. And I think that that's been really cool to see that translation that I think when you're translating the other way around, which again, we'll talk about at some point, I think most famously like Magic the Gathering Arena, that feels easier one-to-one to me because technology, you can do more, not less, I feel like. Whereas when you're making something more analog, there are things that you just can't do that you could do in a video game.
Right. I think of it in the same sort of area as when you adapt a property into a different genre. Pokemon has appeared in so many different forms and in so many different kinds of genres. Even just talking about video games, Pokemon the RPG has also been a card game and the digital version of the card game. It has been a tactical RPG. It has been a mystery dungeon. It has been Picross. It has been Match 3, all of that. And throughout, you have to figure out what it is that keeps it feeling like Pokemon. Some of that is just the design of the characters. If there's Pikachu, everyone's happy. But it's also type advantages or other things that are going on. And Pokemon is able to have that kind of broad stroke advantage in terms of that kind of adaptation, but not everything does. And so sometimes a property will translate well, like Mario can do sports, Mario can be a board game in Mario Party, but I don't know if I'd want an actual physical Mario Party board game.
Right.
I don't think I would survive.
I don't think it would work. It'd go the way of Monopoly, I feel like. But I'm glad you bring up Pokemon. I think it's a good starting point for a conversation about this translation. Obviously, the Pokemon card game has been around forever, and we played it. We did a raid battle at the convention, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The raid battles are relatively new to Pokemon in the last few generations, and I think what's interesting about the Pokemon card game and being around as long as it has is that it just has this legacy and this build-up that they iterate on, but still when it comes to the basic rules is pretty straightforward and feels very much still like the video games. I'm someone who, until east of this year, had never played the card game before. I collected the cards for a while as a kid, and then I stopped. But I'd never actually played it. And then when I found out that my favorite Pokemon of this gen, Sprigatito, was going to be an enamel pin that was exclusive if you play the game at, if you want to get me to do something, just say there's an exclusive enamel pin. And so I played it for the first time. I was like, oh, this is actually genuinely fun. I shouldn't be that shocked. They've been refining it over God knows how many years.
Right.
But it was fun to sit down with you and your incredible spouse, Sarah, to like play this raid along with a wonderful gentleman we met in line. And the four of us, won. And it was a really cool dynamic that felt like the raid battles from the games, but still had some mechanics that were very much exclusive to the card game and still made it really an interesting thing to play.
And there again, it has those straightforward aspects of, okay, it's a battle. You have a limited number of moves. Those are already baked into the game. And so you don't have to worry about if you're converting a different kind of RPG and you've got your wizard or spellcaster character and they've got so many spells. Oh my God, they've got so many spells. How do we do this? No, it's fine. Pokemon can only have 4 moves anyway, no matter how smart they are.
Right.
Even if they knock it down to 2 moves, you have the idea already. Well, what about dual typing? No, just one typing. Where's Poison? They're dark type now. It's fine. And you kind of simplify that and set that together. By the same token of certain complicated board games I prefer in digital form because, yeah, I can do all the rulings, but I'd rather keep playing, where Pokemon can do the calculations of a dual type Pokemon using a different move. Does that give it a bonus? How does that work and everything else? You can streamline it for the game and still have the same feeling of a one-on-one Pokemon battle with your team. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Whereas other games and other properties, if they don't have that either strong of a branding or strong of a design, not that their design isn't strong, but not one suited towards this sort of conversion, you do run into those sort of things where other game adaptations are basically Hogwarts Monopoly. It's just Monopoly, but it's got famous locations from whatever property you have. And I also brought up converting Pokemon to other genres because some of the games that we saw, it's not exactly like, oh, it's this game, you just slapped this character on it, which does happen. But there are those things of, here's some shorthand. One of the interviews that we did was with Adam McCrimmon, who did the design of Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party, which is a card game that was, as you'll find in the interview, made to coincide with the announcement of Borderlands 3. And they had such a limited time window that they had to use an older design for one of their games, make some tweaks, make some adaptations, and go, what can we do to make this feel like Borderlands? Because that's also a series that it can feel like Borderlands or it doesn't. And fans will know. And so they were able to take a design that they knew worked and apply the characters, the world that they knew people were looking for, and making all of those little changes work.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party as a Borderlands kind of time capsule is this is before Tiny Tina's Wonderland. This is before Borderlands 3, where Tiny Tina kind of grows up and becomes this whole other important character. She was fairly important in 2 and in the DLC for 2, but like really becomes important in the third game and in her spinoff. And so I think it's really interesting to see this kind of in-between version. Tiny Tina's debut in 2 is very different from how she grows up into 3 and the kind of character she becomes in 3 and Wonderland. And so I think it's a really interesting in-between point. And, you know, it's based on their card game Robot Lab, but it's an alteration of it with some expanded rules and adjustments. Kind of, it was a patch notes kind of version game almost, he says in the interview, because you have this game that you really love that you got out, but then realized some tweaks or changes that you could have made, but it's printed, it's out. With this version, they were able to make those changes. And you're designing Claptraps, of course, one of the more famous robots in the franchise. And it really is this kind of between the flavor text, the artwork, and other things, it really does feel like Borderlands. Love or hate the games, they have a distinct art style and a distinct personality.
They got a voice.
Right. And I think that those games, as much as I love them for being the schlooters that they are, a term I hate and just sounds terrible off the tongue, it is a game that is pretty iconic within that genre, right? It defined it. Regardless of how you feel about Randy Pitchford or even Borderlands as a whole, it is a defining franchise in video games, especially in schlooters and in shooters in general. The fact that this game is not a schlooter in any way, now I just can't stop saying
Shooter,
it. Please
looter.
help me.
Looter, shooter.
Looter, shooter, shooter, looter. This is not relying on the mechanics of Borderlands. It's relying on your knowledge of the franchise and your love of the characters, which I think is also equally strong if you're a fan of Borderlands. I think that's the thing that is really interesting about IPs and converting things like this, is that you are also on some level relying on the popularity and understanding of that fan base and the franchise in order to make the thing, right? That's why a lot of board games aren't licensed to anything, because they want to start from zero, because sometimes that's easier, building fans in just based on what you make versus a name of recognition. We could have a whole different conversation on IP. We've talked about video games based on IP before, and we will again. But I think this is a really interesting example of using what's known about a franchise to your advantage and then making a fun game on top of it that doesn't really have to do that much with the mechanics of the game itself.
Right. I do want to emphasize that as we say that they sort of took a game concept that they've already worked on and refined it, and then I want to say they integrated it with Borderlands, or they integrated Borderlands with it and not just slapped it on and went, hey, we're good.
Right.
Because an area that kind of is related to this that I want to liken it to is licensed playing cards. I actually really like collecting card decks.
Same.
I've got a drawer. I've got several dozen. I don't have a problem. Stop it. Something that I run into, and especially because when you buy a deck of playing cards, they're usually sealed.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's Mario Brothers themed. It's Ghostbusters themed. It's Princess Bride themed. You're like, cool. Does that just mean cool card backs and the face cards are drawn like the characters, and then 2 through 10 is a bicycle deck? Because I kind of don't need that. I don't love that at all. I want a little bit of effort put into integrating it. You don't have to turn it into a transformation deck where every single card has something that utilizes it or something else. If it does, awesome. You have my money.
Right.
Like, I want that right now. But by comparison, Fangamer released a whole bunch of different playing card decks, and I actually brought my Shovel Knight playing card deck with me to PAX Unplugged in case we needed to play cards at any point. I usually carry a deck of cards with me. This is just one of those things. And it was designed by Laura Verdon, and it is beautiful. Matt, have you seen this deck?
I don't think so, no.
It's one where, yes, of course, the face cards are the different knights, Order of No Quarter, whatever else. The back is great. But the art of it in general is the design, the borders, and everything else is distinct for that deck, as well as the fact that, I wish I could remember off the top of my head, each of the suits, it wasn't spades, clubs, hearts, and diamonds. It was like shovels and that. I mean, spade is a shovel, but
I get what you mean.
they did the same thing for their Final Fantasy VI deck and their Legend of Zelda deck as well. They're not changing up how playing cards work, but they are making it feel like they integrated it with the property and not just slapped on some high-quality pictures, if even high quality, and called it a product, which is something that happens on both sides of the analog and the digital gaming realm.
Yeah, and I shouldn't be surprised that both of us collect playing cards. In fact, Sarah and I have a fishbowl filled with them, and not only do we buy like licensed ones or ones that are part of a franchise, but we also buy ones from each city we visit. So we have a record of like where we've been based on the playing card decks we have. We do have some duplicates because we don't always remember if we've bought them, but we try and buy something unique looking. So at least if we buy it from the same location, it looks different.
If you buy duplicate decks, honestly, there are several card games that need more than one deck. And I will tell you that the only deck of cards I have consistently had two of for the longest time is my two Red Dead Redemption decks that I got years ago. Not Red Dead Redemption 2, Red Dead Redemption 1 when they were promoting it. They handed those out. I got a deck, Sarah got a deck, and some of the folks on Sarah's side of the family love this Gin Rummy variation that needs two decks, and it was sort of, well, we need two decks. What have you got? I've got these. All right, cool. And that's also one where rather than white cards, they've got that sort of like yellowed wanted poster look to them, a little bit afraid to the design on the edges, very evocative, but also easy to read. So yeah, those kind of become our go-to bring everywhere two decks of cards. So yeah, duplicates are fine too, but it's a very funny thing.
Yeah, I mean, also this makes me think that we need to do an episode on strangest video game related non-video game things like playing cards, coasters, mugs, things like that.
If we actually engaged with TikTok a little better, that would absolutely be the like, and show us yours.
That's true. We do have a TikTok. There's, I think, one video on it, which is our trailer for the show, which if you're already a fan of the show, you'll have seen before. So it's not new, but hey, we're there in theory.
We've staked out the space.
Yes. Bringing it back to wrap up on Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party, the thing is that what makes this stand out the most is the art, and like the playing cards you were talking about, like they didn't just slap a claptrap body on a card, you know, make some arms and not think about it. The arms all have personality or are holding things, the wheels and tank treads or whatever else, and like the ability cards, whether Tina's on them or someone else, like they have flavor text, which are for a Magic fan you're very familiar with, and like all of those things together in the design of these cards and these claptrap bodies really make the game pop in a way that otherwise, if it were just generic robots, might also be fun, but you're starting from the mechanics and not an investment in the aesthetics and what people are interested in. And we're going to have an interview featured with Adam at the end. He really goes into the depths of how the design worked, how the partnership with Randy Pitchford and with Gearbox worked. And it's really a fascinating story, whether you like the game or not, how these things get made. And it's kind of really cool to get that kind of insight, which we've gotten some other places, but we really kind of got to dig in here with Adam. I think it's important now that we talk about a board game that, honestly, if we didn't play this at PAX Unplugged, our listeners would riot, as we mentioned this video game at least once an episode.
We already have.
I mean, several times, yes. But we did finally play. I think Jeff had played. You'd played it before, right?
Very briefly. Last PAX Unplugged, but it was kind of like, this didn't feel right without you.
Right. So together we played the Shovel Knight board game Dungeon Duels. This is a game I've been eyeing for a long time. Obviously, big Shovel Knight fans, both of us. And we were lucky enough to get to hang out with Jonathan Phillips Bradford, who is the designer of the game. He was demoing it at the booth. We got to play it with him. And we do plan to bring him on for a more longer form interview at another point, which he was psyched to do. But I was so excited to get to play this game. And like we were talking before about aesthetics being important to a board game, especially if it's based on a franchise. What I love about this is when you have a game with minifigures, you could like cheap out and get these really generic looking ones, or you can go for the meeple look, which works perfectly fine as well. But they really invested. They know how important and iconic these characters are. So each figurine looks so much like the characters from the game. They're high quality detail. They're a solid color. But like it was really kind of engaging from moment one to see both the enemies and the heroes look so high quality, because already I'm like, oh, this looks like the thing. I'm really in.
Yeah, absolutely. They were able to have Shovel Knight as well as Plague Knight, Spectre Knight, Treasure Knight, King Knight, all of the Order of No Quarter, and looking incredible and being in such a way that they can work as both player characters and villains because of the nature of the game, where sometimes you're fighting them and sometimes you're playing as them. All of the generic enemies, all of your cards and pieces, the loot, everything else, all of those parts that are just as crucial to the digital design of Shovel Knight, they put a lot of effort into. I think it's mentioned in our playtest interview clip that we'll have at the end of the episode that I think there's about 50 minis in the game.
Yeah, it's a gigantic game box. One of the reasons I did not buy one when we were there, the price factors in a bit, but also it was this giant box. I'm like, maybe I'd rather have that shipped to me instead of carrying it home and shoving it into the trunk of my car. But it's really also the thing that I think makes the box so gigantic and so impressive about the build of this game is that imagine Shovel Knight. Have you played it? You imagining it? You know what it's about?
Look up an image, good.
That's the board game. And what's really fascinating about it is like not just in design and look. The game board is these 4 tiles with a start tile, and as you move across the board, the back tile comes off and the front tile flips up. And you literally are side scrolling top down across a map based on one of the locations from Shovel Knight that ends with you fighting a member of the Order of No Quarter. They're all themed. They have a stage for every night. And there are spike traps and other things, and you're really moving through, you're fighting enemies, and it's sort of pseudo co-op. The person with the most treasure wins, which makes sense for Shovel Knight. There are spike traps when you fall in one, or if you die to the hands of an enemy, you lose some of your treasure, and your treasure stays there, and other people can pick it up. There are dirt mounds where you could dig up treasure. The publishers, Panda Cult Games, like they really, really dug into this in a way that is really impressive. If you're someone who's never played Shovel Knight, this kind of dedication might turn you off. But I think it works so mechanically well that even if you're not a fan of Shovel Knight, it would be a fun game to play. But definitely if you love that franchise, which I guess we can call it a franchise, there have been so many expansions and spinoffs.
Right.
You would really love this game. It'd be hard not to, just because they are so dedicated to what makes Shovel Knight tick and how you make that a board game.
I think it is a well-designed board game, even if you are not a big Shovel Knight fan. And it doesn't necessarily have little references and pieces within it that would turn off people who aren't familiar with it. It's not like playing a licensed Munchkin game where if you don't know the franchise, you go, I guess this is a big deal. Okay, I'm going to use this guy's left arm, and everyone loses their mind, and you're the only one left in the dark.
Right.
Whereas here you can go, well, these are all very cool-looking guys, and I want Polar Knight. He's the big one. Let's go, or whatever it is. And the stats, because all of the characters have stats, they're all comprehensive and easy to read. When you go to a boss fight, they are sort of AI controlled, as it were. You shuffle up a deck of moves for them to do, and they do them. And we only got to see King Knight's boss deck, but it felt like King Knight. And as was explained, when you run out of cards for the boss, if the fight goes that long, you don't shuffle the deck. You've now established a boss pattern. And I think that was one of the moments where, for me, I already loved this game. I loved the effort they put into it. I loved all the little pieces of design. I had not considered that. I had not seen that coming. And in hindsight is blindingly obvious in the way that a great idea can only be. The game itself is full of those. And, let's pull the Band-Aid off this thing. MSRPs for at least $100.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know. Fuck it. Put the minis in your Dungeons and Dragons game. I don't care. Make some stats for that. Make these things work. I definitely bought a Duel of the Planeswalker board game at a sidewalk sale for $5 because it came with little minis. And I went, well, if nothing else, I'm getting several minis for $5. So, this is the flip side of that. And they're high quality. And at some point, Matt and I are going to invest in a copy of this, get the extra characters they have, and hopefully do some kind of like on stream or on whatever playthrough of this, because if nothing else, it's just a very cool game. I can't remember if this one had solo rules or anything.
It does. It's 1 to 4 players. Yeah, because the boss knights kind of play themselves. You can move through the world on your own. I think the rules change because obviously it's not about having the most
treasure, and you're not necessarily competing with. When you end up in the same space as enemies and a fellow player, you can choose to fight the enemies, you can choose to fight the fellow player, however that works, or collateral damage. And that is definitely a facet of the gameplay that you're losing out on if you do it solo play. So I would imagine there's some separate rules for it.
My guess is there's like lives or whatever, like you have like in the actual single player game, you have a certain amount of lives to get to the thing, or you get a game over or have to start over or continue or whatever.
That never happens in Shovel Knight. You just lose more treasure.
Oh, that's true.
There's no game over. There's no lives. True. It's one of my favorite things about the design of Shovel Knight.
That's true. You're right. There must be some lose condition in the board game, obviously, but maybe not. Maybe you just see how far you can get or how fast you can do it. But it definitely plays really well. And yeah, for sure, this is one of those board games that Jeff and I think would have a lot of fun playing on stream for an extra life or something else. And so definitely in the plans for the future, maybe sometime next year. But definitely if you are a fan of Shovel Knight, it is worth checking out. And even if you're not, but like interestingly, mechanically crunchy board games, it's also got that for you as well.
A fun little contrast as we change gears here in terms of Shovel Knight having these high quality miniatures, and from the word go, you're like, oh my God, I'm in. Like, these things are just beautiful no matter what, even unpainted. And of course, their display case had the painted versions, and I am dreaming about them so much. When we play tested Sonic Roll, there was kind of a moment for all of us going, oh, so we don't have like little figurines of Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy. You don't need them. It actually kind of gets in the way of how you play. It also evokes side-scrolling, but in a different way, and it uses the dice rolls. And it's one of lots and lots of dice rolls and little bits of precision and strategy and a bit of random elements of it all too. And all of the different ways that it connected to the Sonic franchise, it was clear from the get-go that there was a lot of love. The art in this is incredible. The assets and everything they pulled were gorgeous. And it was like, okay, now I see this. You've got blue dice, yellow dice, red dice. Okay, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, cool. But as the game went on and as more rules revealed themselves, the connection also deepened and became more obvious and wasn't something that they necessarily needed 3D printed, sculpted versions of the characters to achieve that.
No, yeah. So the box for the game has this like Sega Genesis case design. The art style is very reminiscent of the recent release of Sonic Superstars. The main characters you get to play as are, of course, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, who are the 4 characters in that game. But the design and like Jeff was talking about the cards, the Badnik art is all based on the classic games, the pixel art era.
And they shout them out on the back of the box.
Yeah. And so, first of all, we should shout out Lauren Yu, who reached out to us via email, got us an appointment to play test the game, and hopefully we will be able to get a press copy to play it when it comes out, the full release.
She actually ran us through the game as well, so it was really great getting to meet Lauren.
Yeah, and she'll be featured in the chat that we have later on at the end of the episode. But she was telling us that the lead designer, Tony Thorpe, not only loves the Sonic franchise and has been playing it since he was a kid, he mainlined the classic games, 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles and CD while working on this game to really steep himself in like what makes a Sonic game interesting, what people want from a classic Sonic game, and how we can make this fun and add some complexity without making it overwhelming or impossible. It was really interesting to kind of get that background for it. And it is clear that this is a labor of love.
Oh, yeah.
It is mostly like playing through a stage of Sonic. So how it works is there are 4 zones they said that are going to be in the final product based on famous zones throughout the classic era. The way it works is you have to clear a path to the end of the stage, and you do segments of the stage, and the different roles grant you different parts of it, and you unlock badniks to fight, rings to keep you safe, certain abilities, power-ups, Each character has their own 3 abilities and a super special ability that you can use. It just is clear that a game like this that is based on dice rolling, which can be kind of one note, is really, really well tuned. Obviously, we're rolling dice as Sonic who rolls, but how do we make that feel like Sonic?
As well as the fact that they made it a cooperative game. Again, there is a point tally at the end. There is calculating your score. There is a winner. But there is also the fact that, well, when we did the playtest, just kind of where we ended up sitting, I ended up playing as Tails, which felt nostalgic. And Tails has an ability. Tails can fly for himself, but also can help alter dice rolls for other characters if they're rolling jump dice because, they can jump and he can grab them and give them a little boost there. Knuckles is both able to kind of go off on his own and is also very adept at taking care of any sort of baddies or badniks that happen. But Amy, on the other hand, her use of dealing with badniks can also benefit other players. So you do want to pay attention to everybody, help each other out on those sorts of roles, as well as keep each other honest on the rules, because there's lots of little interactions. The rules themselves are pretty straightforward, but the interactions do get a bit fiddly. They're definitely not insurmountable. But anytime you land on a space where badniks are spawned, you have to deal with one and you've got to give it to somebody else. So you can either think cooperatively of who's not dealing with a lot right now or is more able to deal with it, or you can go, well, you've got a lot of problems. Here's another one. Have fun kind of thing. You can play that however you want. To continue the connection to the Sonic franchise, there's special stages, there's Blue Sphere, there's Chaos Emeralds.
Yeah, there is a 4x4 grid of Blue Sphere that as you flip the Blue Sphere cards, they're either a red sphere, which ends the bonus stage, a bouncer sphere, like a bounce ball sphere, which just continues the Blue Sphere, and eventually you can find the Chaos Emerald. The really cool thing that makes this feel truly devoted to Sonic is there's a rules manual, which we got to look at a little, and there are a set of 2 pages that are sealed that until you find all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you cannot unseal. But once you do, there's something special in there, special rules, special game mode, whatever it is. It's a mystery.
We didn't get to see it.
Now, of course, you could open it whenever you want, right? There's an honor system, but the fact that they have an extra feature that once you find the 7 Chaos Emeralds, you can engage in. I love when games evolve that way. And that's a really fun thing that makes it also feel very much like a Sonic game where there's a hidden thing that until you get all the Chaos Emeralds, you don't get to see. Whether it's Super Sonic, an extra stage, a different boss, whatever it is.
I kind of hope there's supersonic rules. And even the boss fight, it had the same idea of you roll dice to move along a path and you need to hit the boss a certain number of times. And every time you hit them, you go back to the start of a path.
Yeah.
You hit the boss, you bounce off of them. There's little moments like that. You sit there and I suppose in designing a board game, you kind of go, well, why does that rule happen? And if you're adapting a pre-existing property, whether it be a video game or a television show, a book, or whatever, you can go, well, this happens because this happens in the original property. Sonic Roll was full of those. Shovel Knight was full of those. It was very interesting, too, to play other games at PAX Unplugged that were not based on any particular franchise, but were evocative of older arcade mechanics. We played a game called Retrograde that was sort of a Space Invaders dice rolling game. There is a game called Potion Slingers that is a card game that we are definitely having the creators on at some point in the future. I didn't get to interview them, but they were first developing a video game that was the card game, then went, well, let's just make the card game. That's easier. Made the card game, and now they had the alpha demo at PAX Unplugged. And so it was the only video game demo that I got to play at the convention. But damn it, I still played video games at this convention. So credentials sustained?
Question mark. Yeah, I think that what's really fun about this topic, and a thing that we will definitely revisit, I think, multiple times, is that this won't always be a success. We were lucky that none of these games were awful. Some were more engaging than others, right? But 3 solid games that understood the source material, which is kind of what we were looking for more than anything. But I think that there's obviously room for there to be colossal failures, just like in anything else. But I think what's really interesting is that because everyone's taste in board games are different, just like anything else, you cannot deny the dedication to the source material that has gone into these adaptations, which I think are always important as we talk about movie adaptations and other things. You want to make sure that there's a clear love, connection, and care for those things, because we've talked about shovelware when it comes to adaptations, and they're everywhere. And so to know that all of these were all high quality in one way or another, regardless of how you felt about the mechanics, I think is really key to making them a success.
You need that continued love to be poured into the game, because it's one thing to have a great single-player video game that you can go back to again and again, or if it's only okay but it really appeals to you, like you can go and play it and have a great time with it. But board games, I know Shovel Knight, Dungeon Duels, and Sonic Roll have solo player rules, but they are made to be multiplayer games. You need to be able to convince your friends or tolerable acquaintances to play these games with you. If the people who make the games don't show their love and their understanding behind these franchises, these licenses, behind the mechanics in the games, how are they going to convince us? And then how are we going to translate that to convince others to play it with us? One of my biggest problems with a lot of board game conventions is, unfortunately, my regular tabletop gaming group is too big for a 4-player game. Yeah. Otherwise, it would have been super easy to justify Shovel Knight and been like, all right, we're playing Shovel Knight this week. What kind of game is it? You're going to find out, everybody. Who else played it? Just Sarah? Just Sarah? I don't care. We're going. Kind of thing. That's fine. I'm somebody who's fortunate enough to have a regular gaming group for that, but not everyone does. And so in the same way that board games kind of need to go the way of great pieces, beautiful art, great material that feels good in your hands, good heavy dice to roll or cool things, whatever else, to get you to want to engage with that world, you then need to be able to convince others to want to engage in that world with you. So there are different obstacles to overcome that I haven't even begun to think about what those could be and what those are. Certainly the ease of rules. In a video game where you can have those sort of antipieces where it's like, here's these two mechanics. Now here's a challenge involving both of those mechanics. You need to be able to explain those succinctly and easily. And I'm sure that's playtesting for the designers of these games when they bring them to conventions where they're like, okay, how quickly can I explain this to people? Where do I lose them in the rules? Is that a problem in the rules? Do I just need to tighten that up? Or do I need to change the mechanics of it all? It is a similar but different problem in games. You always need to, no matter what medium of games, you need to be able to teach people how to play your game, and they need to find it fun in the process. So it's a whole other avenue and challenge. It doesn't even have anything to do with the presence or lack of a license.
For sure. I mean, some of my favorite board games are licensed games from things that I've never seen. To the shock and awe of many people, to a frustrating degree at this point, I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones. But the Game of Thrones board game made by Fantasy Flight is one of my favorite board games because it's just a lot of fun to play.
Right.
Strength in board games is that it's strong in spite of the IP almost. It needs to be a success at least. And there's a white whale of board games for me, which is the Gears of War board game, also made by Fantasy Flight. It's out of print, it's expensive. But I play tested it once many years ago and loved it. And friends of mine who had never played Gears of War once, I happen to be a Gears fan, or at least of the classic trilogy, because I haven't played them recently. Now it's my goal in life to eventually find an affordable copy of that game to play it more regularly, because I had friends who had never played a shooter before, had barely played any video games, who loved that game. And I think that's the strength of board games that's also really fascinating to me, is because, of course, it's its own thing. The IP doesn't have to be the reason you're playing, but it can enhance it. Sonic Roll probably would have been a very good game even without these characters, but these characters inform the rules and vice versa, and I think really make it kismet in a way that's not required, but is always great when you get it.
Absolutely. I mean, Sarah is somebody that didn't grow up with Sega systems, so her experience with Sonic the Hedgehog is actually kind of limited. She's very aware of who the characters are just through pop culture osmosis and being a gamer, but she never had a Sonic game in her home for any reason. She watched some of our friends play games, but the first Sonic game that she played start to finish on her own was Sonic CD in the last year.
Right.
Followed up immediately by Knuckles Chaotix, which she hated. But, yeah, you raise a great point with Game of Thrones. I remember playing the Battlestar Galactica board game where I saw a little bit of Battlestar Galactica. I had a roommate who was obsessed with it. I knew enough of it. But not enough where if you're getting nitty-gritty on the mechanics, I can go, hey, that's not how Sultai is. Come on now. But because anyone could be a Cylon, the cyborg betrayers and everything else, there was the trader mechanic. I like when a trader mechanic in a game kind of pops up midway through, or you don't start playing as if you're the traitor. You
Yes.
find out later if you're the traitor. Because, I don't know, social deduction games, I've had too many bad experiences of people overplaying it, or the sort of reason why I don't do online shooters kind of feeling is the best connection I can make. Regardless, good mechanics in a board game that is based off of a licensed property, you're able to glean certain things about the characters. You can kind of learn a little bit about them through how they play. I remember when the Versus card game came out when I was in college. Now I think it's like a 2-player card game kind of thing. They changed up the rules a bunch, but its first iteration years ago, it was Marvel and DC, and I learned so much about so many different characters through those cards.
Sure.
Whether through flavor text or through what affiliation they happen to have from card to card, go, oh, I guess they had an evil phase because they're associated with these guys for a card. And how their mechanics worked. I was able to glean certain things. There was a whole Green Lantern mechanic of how strong is your willpower. And I could figure out like, oh, I guess this guy's really strong. And you'd look it up later and go, oh, I was right. You're able to get a feel for how certain Sonic characters play through how Sonic Roll is, or how Shovel Knight characters are, where Plague Knight has more range but less health. I think that's also another way that the game tells you how it's played, where it came from, and all of those little moments of conveyance are just as important for the world. Adam points out in our interview about Tiny Tina that even in the rule book, there's bits of the rules crossed out and other notes written in a purple pen that are meant to be Tiny Tina and written by one of the writers for Borderlands, who is sort of like, this is the guy who knows Tiny Tina. So all of those bits and pieces, you have new opportunities as well as new obstacles to convey through board games.
I think this is something we'll revisit again. I would love to cover PAX Unplugged again and play more video game-based board games, or flip it the other way and play some board games that we know have video game adaptations, like Magic the Gathering and Talisman and so many others.
I'll dedicate an entire episode to Gloomhaven. Just watch me.
You know, it takes 3 days to play, so of course an entire episode I think would only scratch the surface. But yeah, I think it was really cool to do this. Big shout out to Stride PR and of course the folks over at the PAX team for allowing us to cover this as press. We are excited every time we get to do this, and it is never expected. We are always grateful. If you are a fan of our other coverage, like previous PAXs, we will have longer form versions of the interviews that are featured at the end of this episode that are individually released on the Patreon. We will do the Patreon spiel in just a moment, but if you want to hear more uncut, longer form, extra stuff, that's the best place to find it. This was really fun to cover, and like I said, there are tons of other board games we didn't even get to that we would love to talk about. I have friends, both within the industry and outside of it, who love board games or who help design board games that would love to talk about it. And of course, there's a whole other area like Retrograde of talking about board games that are inspired by video games, but not directly connected to a specific franchise, which there are a ton of as well. With all of that said, did you get to go to PAX Unplugged this year? If you did, what did you see that you loved? What didn't you like? If you've played a ton of board games based on video games, what are some of your favorites? Again, we've only scratched the surface here, as we do on a lot of these topics, and would love to know if you have some favorites that already exist, that don't exist yet, that you're looking forward to, and everything in between.
We were very fortunate to find 3 great games that were also all great contrasts in varying ways and methods of adapting video game licenses to board games, but they didn't have the Metal Gear Solid board game or Divinity Original Sin 2 board game, and there were so many others out there. What are some of your favorites? Which ones should we check out or find? Which ones really got the mechanics? Which ones really just kind of slapped on the license? Let us know, because there's too many video games to play. And then once you throw board games and card games and tabletop RPGs into the mix, ooh, buddy. And we didn't even talk about anything that is a tabletop RPG adaptation. There is an entire Witcher tabletop RPG.
Correct. Yep.
There's so much. We want to know about those too. Maybe we can cover them, or maybe it's just something fun that we can all share with each other. Let us know. There's so many great ways to get in touch with us. You can find us across any social media that we are part of as of this episode at Fun and Games Pod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. you can visit our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod, to find all of these episodes, all of our side quest episodes, all of our writings and backlog logs, games we've beaten. Our Game of the Year list will be going up soon, and the main place to find them will be on our Patreon. That feels like, at the moment, the most stable spot to put any content at this point, and
Correct.
we'll talk about it on other social media and link to all of it there. You don't have to give us any money to read anything we put up and to experience the vast majority of what we post there. But we do appreciate those who have the means and the heart to support us in our endeavors and allow us to, maybe next PAX we're going to have better recording. We do a great job with editing and with our phones. Trust me, we're professionals on that, but it would be nice to have a Zoom. I think people will take us a little more seriously. We also appreciate those that are up on the high scoreboard. The high scoreboard today is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. You will roll 3 dice, and if your letter comes up, you can set that dice aside. And then if you don't, you can trade those in for treasure tokens. And the treasure tokens can be used as credits later, but you do have to go through the trivia portion. Is that too complicated? It's fine. Don't worry. It's fun. It is so fun. We're going to have so much fun, everybody.
I wish Jeff was doing a bit, but I think I've had this actual conversation before. The best place to interact with me and Jeff besides social media is on our Discord server. There's a permanent invite link down in the show notes, as well as on our website, certainpov.com, where our podcast and so many other great nerdy podcasts are featured as well. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you have a moment, rate and review our podcast on your platform of choice, especially Apple and Spotify. Spotify, you just need to listen to about 30 seconds or more, and you can rate it. Apple, you don't even have to listen at all, and you can rate and review, if you've got the time. But really, the best way to get this podcast featured and get it into the ears of more incredible listeners like yourself is to rate and review us on those platforms. So please do that when you have a moment. If you have not yet, we would greatly, greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Whether just as a listener, as a patron, as a supporter, as a reviewer, any and all of those means and methods that we connect with each other and get this podcast out to more listeners so that we can spread this all out, because this is not a solo game. This requires as many players as possible. It is the largest party game. Podcasting is just the largest party game. I couldn't have understood that without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am at AK Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
We're here with Adam, who designed Tiny Borderlands, Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party. Did I get the title right?
Yeah, you got the title right. Longest game title we've got. One of the longest game titles there is.
You have a lot of fun with where does the colon go, how many colons, comma, whatever.
Yeah, it's funny, when we were first designing the logo for this, we wanted to create some kind of Tiny Tina's sub-brand as part of this. But we've got the Borderlands brand, we've got this new Tiny Tina's moniker that was, we were creating as part of this.
Wonderland,
right, like in the same world. We wanted to elicit that feel of Tiny Tina's Wonderland in there, right? And then you've got Robot Tea Party, and at one point we had 3 different fonts, and actually Randy Pitchford looked at one of them and went like, oh, guys, 3 fonts. We're not doing 3 fonts.
So you're the lead designer in this game.
Yeah.
You've made this game based on the Borderlands brand, and more specifically the Tiny Tina's brand.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how this game came to be. Obviously, it's not just a spin-off, but it's kind of a spin-off of a spin-off.
Yeah, so it's a re-implementation of an existing XYZ Game Labs design called Robot Lab. Robot Lab was our first game. We released that back in, I think, 2017, 2016, somewhere in there. And we had an opportunity a few months after that game came out. We had an opportunity to meet some of the wonderful people over at Nirvana Games and Gearbox, had some good conversations with them about the idea of let's make a game in the Borderlands universe. So we started to go down that path and very quickly realized that at the time we were talking, this was August of the year before, of 2018, so before Borderlands 3 was even announced. No one even knew this game was coming out, whether it was going to happen, whether it was happening, did happen, whatever, right? So at the time that we were talking to them in August, and in October they told us, go. We're good to go. The catch was the deadline was March, and we had to have product in hand and on site at PAX East 2019 for the announcement of Borderlands 3. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. So was that what elicited the decision to adapt the previous game to make that?
Yeah, and making sure that we hit a deadline forced us to go, okay, we need to look at a design that's on the shelf, a design that we already know really well, one that works really well. And it was actually Randy Pitchford who said, like, hey, Robot Lab, that's pretty fun. I want to make that with my robots.
Yeah.
At which point I'm like, great, let's pick which robots we're going to choose.
Yeah, fantastic. That's absolutely like a Keys of the Kingdom kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, especially because Borderlands has such personality in every facet of what they do.
Yes.
How much freedom were you allowed in some of your designs there?
Well, so we're following the key design of the game is Robot Lab. So it is about having a central body component and then attaching limbs to that component. So we actually ran through 4 or 5 different concepts. One of them, of course, is Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party, where we're destroying and mutilating claptraps, which everyone loves to do. Of course. This was my favorite of the concepts that we had because it gave us an opportunity to design some new custom art and experiences around Claptrap, which is one of my favorite characters. So it was a personal win for me. But the other ideas we had Dr. Zed's Creature Lab, which was you would collect skag parts and the creatures that exist out in the world. Dr. Zed sends you on missions in Borderlands 2 to collect parts of the creatures so you can use them for experimentation. So we thought, oh, that'd be a cool way to do this. But of course, that's not robots, that's creatures. Another one we considered was making this be about all of the major robots. So think the Mechromancer's bots. And then we had another concept that revolved around the Assassin Zero and the little more backstory about Zero. Of course, that is a concept we didn't go down because this was an announcement for Borderlands 3. We had to be very careful about what we put in the art, what we put in the background, what kind of Easter eggs we included, because they wanted zero spoilers about Borderlands 3 in this product.
Absolutely, and especially because Borderlands from its inception is very much as a looter shooter, one of those find the pieces, pull them together, a very Diablo-like of keywords together to make that thing. So it makes perfect sense that you are pulling pieces, pulling parts, and throwing them all together. Suits itself for a card game. Was there any other sort of concept that if you had all the time to work with, was there anything else that you wanted to try?
I would say there are 3 or 4 really, really cool board game, tabletop game concepts that we explored with Nirvana Games and with Gearbox at the time. This was the project that made sense for the time crunch and the goals that we had. There were other projects that could make sense down the road, but they went off, and from there they actually focused next on doing a RPG in the Bunkers and Badasses universe, which everyone who's a Borderlands fan was extremely excited that was happening.
Absolutely. So this was something that you came to before that was announced.
We did this with them before they did Bunkers and Badasses, before they announced it. In fact, Nirvana Games' very first game was the one they co-published with us here, Borderlands Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party.
Amazing.
Yeah, and now they went on to make the Bunkers and Badasses RPG with a really talented designer over there named Ian Moss. But there's also, as you've probably seen, Borderlands has gone on to make a couple different tabletop products. I think Torg's Badass Arena Badassery is one that I can't remember the name of the company that makes it, but they have a booth here at PAX. So
fantastic.
Awesome. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the broad rules of how this game works and how you're mutilating poor Claptrap.
Yeah,
he deserves it.
In Borderlands Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party, each player gets to choose from one of 5 favorite Claptrap models. For all of them, you're going to be giving them a hat, 2 arms, and a wheel. Because that's what Claptrap has, is a wheel. Every one of them is going to have a matching set of arms, hat, and wheel. So, for instance, the OG Claptrap, as we call him, he's going to have his party hat from his pizza party in Borderlands 2. But he's going to have a kazoo in one arm and a slice of pizza in the other one, and then have a normal wheel. But then our pirate ship Claptrap is going to have 2 arms that are cannons, and his bottom is a boat, not a wheel. And his hat is a pirate hat, right?
Naturally, yeah.
Gentleman Claptrap has a monocle and a cane. Wizard has got a relic and a wand, I believe. And the sheriff has got double pistols, just like you're the sheriff in Borderlands 2. So we really, from the outset, when we first decided Claptraps we were going with, these were the 5 models we wanted. And I think Noelle Pugh, who did the art for this, I think she really, really, really knocked it out of the park. I can't say enough awesome things about not only the design of the individual Claptraps, which she did a really good job really making them feel different from each other. Even though on some of the cards, the difference of the parts is it's just an arm, right? With a lot of white space. So she really had to find a way to make sure they all felt unique and worked. And then the work she did on the card frame itself to give it that very Borderlands lived-in feel. I really, really love the art she did in this game.
Yeah, I can see sort of, you've got the tacks and rivets for the text of the rules, and you've got
Yeah.
like a little bit of fold and striation there.
Yeah.
But yeah, Borderlands always has that very fun but very dystopic kind of lived-in feel.
Yes, yeah, and that's actually one of the hardest parts about creating this game was really making sure the art was right, because Borderlands is such a distinctive art style, such a distinctive feel to what it looks like.
I often think of it as, rather than a grimdark world, it's whimsical, so it's grimsicle.
Yeah, it's Grimsicle. I like that. It's Grimsicle. So one of the big things for this is, of course, we're doing a licensed IP that is highly visible. Its art style is super important, right? So we had to get an artist who really knew the style. Noelle was amazing. She's done other board game art before. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
And we needed somebody who knew Borderlands really well. And at the time, Noelle actually still is the community manager for Gearbox.
Amazing.
She was inside the company and knew what to look for, who to talk to.
And did that make communication easier with Gearbox in terms of, hey, we want to throw something crazy here? What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a separate project from them, so we had to be careful with the fact that, she worked for Gearbox, but was doing a project on the side. All of that was fine. There were issues there, but it also meant that all of the art, every single thing that got produced, had to go through the lead art directors at Gearbox and the people who control the Borderlands IP at Gearbox at every step of the way. So there are cards, for instance, Party Foul. In the background, you'll notice is the mech from the Necromancer, whose name I can't remember right now, and I'm so sorry, and Zero. But originally, there were two other robots that were also there that would have been spoilers for Borderlands 3 if we would have kept them. In the Swipe card is a card that is inspired mostly by Borderlands 1 more than Borderlands 2.
Right.
And it was we wanted to make sure that we got these characters into the game somewhere. Our Brock card, which is Bring the Pain, where he punches parts off of other claptraps, originally was going to be a Torg card. But Torg doesn't really appear much in Borderlands 3. We didn't know that at the time.
No, and Torg's got an iconic design, so absolutely, go for it.
Right, exactly. So then we went, we have to do it Brock. But then once Brock was in the game, there was a lot of, his outfit's different in the new one. So what kind of details do we need to pay attention to about the outfit and the thing? So the art process was the longest part of this. And when we only had really 4.5 months from go to product in hand at a show, ready for people to buy, right? And in that time frame, so we went with onshore printing because we had to get done with Delano in Michigan. They were fantastic. And then the art was going to be our big holdup. So being able to have that kind of connection, that kind of inside line, the people from Gearbox being so great at giving us pointers and tips, and in some cases coming in and going, hey, let me mess with the shadowing here because it doesn't feel Borderlands enough to us yet, was super important to making this go.
And it makes a lot of sense why, having the gameplay concepts more locked in from the get-go allowed a lot more breathing room for the visuals, which is so well tied to the Borderlands universe.
Yeah, we've designed a lot of games since our early days and gone through a lot of production cycles, and I can say that having this design so dialed in, so locked, because it was already from a printed design somewhere. This design we already printed, we already knew the warts it had, right? Made it so that this could go as quickly and smoothly as it did. If we would have had to design a brand new thing from the ground up, there are so many little pitfalls, gotchas, and switchbacks that happen as you move through production and playtesting that I don't think it ever would have made the deadline it had to make.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as, most video games nowadays, when they come out, from the largest to the smallest, they're able to do patches, they're able to do updates.
You mean they're kind of not done, maybe?
Not quite fully baked. They got to rest on the windowsill for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years after their release date. Apparently. Did this have a little bit of a feeling of okay, we're getting to do, get our robot concept a little more tuned in on this one?
So for us personally, it was awesome to open the hood back up on a design that was our first published design. We've learned a lot about since we made it. And to go in and go, we don't need that card. We don't need it to work this way. We can reword this. We can change this piece. We did a lot of that on this. And actually to the point where there is a design in the vault at XYZ right now that is Robot Lab 2.0, inspired by what we learned changing it for Robot Tea Party, and then adding in things we've learned since then to improve the gameplay.
Love that. Now, was there anything because again, the art style, everything else, going through Gearbox is like making this feel as Borderlands as possible, and even just looking at it, it is, even the card backs.
Yeah.
Was there any particular gameplay tweaks that you enjoyed doing that you got to do that made this feel more like Tiny Tina, made it feel more like Claptrap for you, made it feel more in that world?
I think theming all of the action cards, because all these action cards work essentially how they did in the original game, but being able to theme them to certain players, right? Like Party Foul is a game in the original called Cancel that just stops somebody from doing something, but in this, it's Tina calling a party foul and threatening everyone with a bomb. That feels very Tina. The other thing that actually I think one of my favorite things about this that is often overlooked is a little detail that in the rulebook there are notations all over the place.
Oh, wow.
That are Tina giving you notations on how to play this game. All of those were written by Mikey Newman, who, from everyone I talked to at Gearbox, they're like, this guy knows the voice. He knows the voice of Tina. He knows how it should sound and what it should say. We had an awesome opportunity to work with him just a little bit on this to do some of this flavor adding to the rulebook so that we could really inject it with a layer of Tina. A concept which I believe held up through Bunkers and Badasses as well, where there's the side margins and the notes of like, hey, this is Tina injecting her voice into what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of that idea of, listen, if you're just going to leave the margins blank, that's content on the table as far as...
Exactly, and even down to rules editor, Mikey Newman, and Tiny Tina.
That is remarkable, incredible.
This game's been out for a while.
Yeah.
The Borderlands universe only gets bigger. If you could design another game around a character, do you have a favorite character from that world besides Tina, who's everyone's favorite?
Or Claptrap.
Is there something that you would love to do, or like a character you'd love to see a light shined on in a cool game?
I really think that you could do a really cool junkyard game with Ellie that would be super fun and have a really cool lead. And you get to bring in Scooter, you get to bring in a bunch of other side characters that have a really cool personality and a really fun aura of them that isn't the running, gunning, shooting Borderlands piece. It's like the other part of the world.
But it's a crucial biome of the world.
Right, and I think that's something that doesn't get necessarily enough credit in Borderlands. It's like they didn't just make these cool characters and these cool guns and this cool world. Like, every area you go to, there are side characters and supporting characters that have their own backstory and their own depth that is really good. And I think being able to shine a light on some more of those things is really fun to do in these areas.
Yeah, meanwhile, my first thought would be like, okay, it's a dice rolling game about shooty. You gotta get them.
So Shovel Knight Dungeon Duels is a 1 to 4 player side-scrolling dungeon crawler. We're going to be jumping over spiked pits, beating up bad guys, digging up treasure, accidentally pushing other players into spiked pits to drop some of their treasure. It's okay though, we have infinite lives, so we always come back at the beginning of our turn. And it is a side scroller, however, so one tile at the end of each round is going to slide off as a new one pushes in from the right, creating a forced progression auto scroller onto the tabletop. Just like the video game, you can move, you can attack, and you can jump. It's essentially it. You can move up, down, left, or right. No diagonals. Shovel Knight's dealing with more dimensions than he's used to, so no diagonals in this game. The point of the game is to try to get to the most treasure by digging up treasure mounds and defeating bad guys. We've got bone clanks, we've got gold armors, we've got wisdoms, we've got liquid samurais, and we also have some hover halves, but they're not out here on the board. We each also have our own special ability. Spectre Knight has the charging slash, which allows him to move and attack with one action. And if he succeeds, like say for example it looked like this, you charge and hit. If you succeed, you can charge and hit again. You charge and hit again, with like essentially a ricochet, but you're -1 to your attack each time you succeed. Relics are one-time use items. You can either discard a relic before you roll to automatically gain 2 successes, whatever that roll is, or use whatever the one-time ability is there. They are free actions, so you do not take up your
And do I have to use it now, or I can hold on to it?
You can hold on to it.
Cool.
So Chester, the merchants over here, that's where you spend your coins for permanent upgrades.
Cool.
It's the end of the round, so this is going to slide off.
And we side scroll.
That's so cool.
There's 50 minis in the box.
Yeah.
This is all the base game.
Okay.
And then plus a lot more.
Almost like the base one.
Bard gets to charm other players. Mona has a ranged bouncy bomb. Shield Knight gets to deflect attacks back at people.
Right, because it would just be, so it would be another action to move back over, and then my third action would be to jump
off. Unless you die.
Unless I die. What's the worst that could happen?
And you died. So you drop half your coins there. That made things interesting.
This is an exciting thing.
I've realized an error in my decision is that there's a wall there and there's a wall here and spikes. I guess I should try to jump first.
Jumping is inevitable at this point.
Yeah.
If only you'd purchased some ghostly garb from Chester.
Shut up. Is that how normally the game ends with a boss fight?
Yes.
How do you determine who is the boss character? Is that something you
you choose
beforehand?
at the stage.
Okay.
Yeah. You choose the stage. Like right now, we're doing Pridemore Keep, and the end of Pridemore Keep is King Knight.
How many stages total in the game?
10.
That's amazing.
You have every night of every single one of the
If you
stages.
flip it over, you have the boss card for your particular a member of the Order
and
of No
each one
Quarter.
of those characters has its own stages.
That's amazing.
Like Plague Knight stages on the other side of these.
Oh, cool.
So does he attack after each player?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I guess
And if this deck empties, you don't shuffle it, you flip it back over to try to learn the boss's attack pattern.
Nice.
Oh.
Oh, it's a dance.
is the win condition whoever has the most treasure?
Yes. And I believe that gave you the winning score at the end of the game.
Yeah.
King Knight has been defeated.
Slow motion, knock that sucker down.
Pick up all Jeff's coins, step over
So
his
that is
body.
the demo, kind of tip of the iceberg of Shovel Knight Dungeon Rules.
Awesome, thank you.
So we've got every single Knight of the Order of No Quarter of the game, every single one of their stages, each with their own side-scrolling style set. So Pridemore Keep, we had King Knight, and Plague Knight's Potionarium, Propeller Knight's Flying Machine, you name it, they're in there. All the different stages, each with its own side-scrolling dungeon tile set. Each stage having its own unique mechanics added to the game. Like the ice tiles, you keep sliding. There's the lava tiles with the big beetle that you have to bounce off of. You name it, it's in there. We have every relic. We only saw the relics for the demo. We also have the curios, the heirlooms, and the Arcana cards, each with its own unique mechanics to it. We have Chester the Merchant showing up on the tiles. We've got powders, the shovel upgrades, armor upgrades, about roughly 50 miniatures in the box with the propeller rats, the bone clangs, the gold armors, liquid samurais, the hover halves, and the wizards.
And very comprehensive stats for all of these things laid out here so that you're not rolling through things back and forth. If anyone is interested in purchasing this game, where can they find it?
PandaColtsGames.com.
Fantastic.
Ding, 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 ding.
Are you meaning
ding,
the blue sphere sound? 4x4, this is 3x4.
I knew I should have had more cards. I know how math works.
There you go.
You sure you want me to play with you?
This is Sonic Roll. It is a semi-cooperative dice rolling game where we are all working together to try to run through the zone as fast as we can. But there is a competitive element where we are trying to have the best score at the end.
Okay.
But if one of us fails, we all fail. So that's where we're trying to work together. So the way the game works is that every character has a unique ability and 3 different dice rolls that they can do. So once you decide on your turn what dice roll you want to do, you would use those dice to place them on the leftmost open spot on a track card for the zone. And then as we go through the zone, badniks might show up to hinder us in some sort of way. There are ways to take damage on the stage itself, as well as get boons in the term of rings or a boost to try to re-roll your dice. Sonic, he has his Insta-Shield, where he can hit one of his blue dice into a red one. Amy has her Pico Pico hammer. She's really good at fighting badniks and helping out her friends fight them as well. Tails has his Buddy Flight, and so you can add 1 to 2 pips to someone else's yellow die or your own yellow die to help them, try to hit the numbers they need. And then Knuckles, he's doing his own thing. He has a secret passage, which is a zone that he can play dice on by himself. We're gonna go until the zone deck runs out, and then we'll fight the boss afterwards.
Okay,
Sounds
cool.
great.
All right. So I'll go first since I know
You know
what's
what
going
you're
on.
doing.
Thank you.
Also, Knuckles would go first.
Knuckles
That's
would
true.
demand to go first.
That's very true.
He'd fly past you, be a little jerk about
Touch
it.
you.
The blue die actually allow you to play multiple times without having to re-roll.
Mm-hmm.
Yellow die get you a ring every time you spend one. And then red die are the best at beating badniks.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the blue is run, the yellow is jump, and the red is spin.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this star post you see right here,
Uh-huh.
you can choose to save your rings. And if you have 5 or more rings, you can go to the bonus level.
Oh, amazing.
Oh, wow.
That's why why we set up the blue orbs.
So-
Okay.
Yes.
So it looks like along the lower track, it's nothing but so there's Badniks too as well. Because
Yeah.
it looks like there's something interesting on each one. Why would you want to do the top one again, evoking Sonic? But up here, it's got a lot of rewards to it.
Yeah, so this one has like higher rewards, and then you can straight up go to the big ring, which would also take you to Blue Sphere.
Yeah.
Got it.
So if you stop your turn early without spending all your dice, you take a time penalty.
Without a time penalty.
And if we run through all the time penalties for the stage, we automatically lose.
Makes the Sonic drowning sound.
Exactly.
The card art is incredible.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, so when we were working on the game, we had to cut out a lot of the assets from the games itself. So our lead game designer was running through the game over and over again to get some of those pixel sprites and like exact shots that we wanted.
What were the particular game titles that were being run through to pull those assets?
Well, majority of the assets are from Sonic Mania, but we did play through all of like the classic Sonic, so 1 through 3, Sonic CD and Sonic and Knuckles, just as a refresher of like, you know, how the original games work, as well as, you know, getting inspo and researching, because our lead game designer, he's played Sonic his whole life, and then myself as like the graphic designer, I actually have never played a Sonic ever.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
so
I-
you're the graphic designer. You did all the art.
Yes, so I did. I put together a lot of the art and the cards, but our games designer, he was the one who was helping me put together what the pixel artwork should look like.
Yes.
Amazing.
Makes a lot of sense. I will say also the cards are like it's very clear what you need to do in every place, right? Like the design of the cards is intuitive for how to play the game, which has not been the case in everything I've played this weekend so far.
I mean, we went through a lot of iterations with the game. We've been working on it for the last 9 months, which has been kind of a crazy development time, especially with how big the game is.
Yeah.
It was always evolving as we worked on it, and it was really important for us for it to like look like Sonic and then also read clearly.
I mean, honestly, even just from seeing the box art, we were like, oh yeah,
it's
they've
got the
it.
Genesis side
Yes.
art and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had actually never seen a Genesis box before. So it was really interesting, like doing the research into how they look, and then trying to emulate that within our game box as well.
Yeah. It's really great.
Have
Love
you
it.
done a lot of video gaming besides Sonic or anything, or is it just?
I feel like I play a lot more multiplayer games.
Of course.
So like I like League of Legends a lot.
Amazing.
You find your corner of the community.
It's still
Yeah.
fun, and we've still got lanes.
Exactly.
And then did you get to play the bonus stage?
I do get to play the
I want to see
bonus
it so
stage.
much.
All right, so I'm a little far away, so I'll just point to which one I'd love to be flipped over.
Okay.
Could I get this one, please?
Oh, it's a red
So it's a
already.
stop.
No.
But I do get a power up,
All right.
and I gain 2 boost.
We've all been there where we get into the bonus stage, we're not paying attention, and walk right into a red sphere immediately.
I could not beat Blue Sphere when I tried Mania. I only tried it recently,
Yeah.
and I never beat Blue Sphere.
It's very
so
hard.
difficult.
Rings are really like banking the rings is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I was playing Hog Wild. Like, I didn't bank any of my rings.
I was playing what I thought was fairly hog wild, and evidently it's very cool that you get the points you get more points for getting the small animals, for taking care of the badniks or anything else, but you can still get plenty of points from the rings. Again, very evocative of all the Sonic the Hedgehog, the side-scrolling games. Everyone does feel a little in their style. Sonic can go fast with 6 dice, where the rest of us only have a maximum of 4 of any of our other abilities to run and push through without needing to re-roll or anything else. The yellow being for jump. Tails has plenty of upward mobility going on there and earning rings throughout that for exploration. Amy and Knuckles both have their own version of very good getting the red dice for a more aggressive style of play, which again can work in some portions of the game versus others. So with all that in mind, how many different worlds, levels are we dealing with here? Because this was Green Hill Zone.
Yeah, so there are 4 total zones that you can go to. Green Hills, Stardust Speedway, Lava Reef, and then Chemical Plant. It scales in difficulty from the ones I said. And they all have different bosses. So at Stardust Speedway, you're fighting against Metal Sonic.
Of course.
Lava Reef, you're going against the Heavy King. And then in Chemical Plant, you are fighting against Eggman. And there is something special about the game where if you're fighting through all 4 campaigns and you find all 7 Chaos Emeralds, there is a secret to unlock in the rule book.
incredible. Now, this also, from what we notice and what we can see on the box and everything, this is a game for 1 to 4 players. We just played through a 4-player version. What does solo play look like? Are there any specific differences?
Yeah, so solo play is where you're really going through the zone by yourself. And I believe in the rule book it talks about the different like specific rules on like how you're going through it by yourself, like in terms of badniks. But you can still go through and beat the level on your own.
Cool. Well, as somebody who is a little brother, it was very nice to actually have a very good multiplayer experience playing Sonic the Hedgehog.
So,
As Tails.
As Tails, no less.
first of all, thank you so much for your time. This was great. This game we're demoing here, it's not out yet. Do you guys have a date for release? Do you know when it's going to be coming out?
Yes, so it's coming out next year in February. It'll be available at Barnes & Nobles all over the U.S., as well as Amazon online.
I'm Adam McCrimmon, CEO of XYZ Game Labs and lead designer of Robot Lab, Borderlands, Tiny Tina's Robot Tea Party, and my personal favorite of them, Arch Ravels, our competitive knitting and crocheting game.
I am Jonathan Phillips Bradford, the owner and game designer for Panda Cult Games.
I did the art direction as well as the license management with Sega. And
Happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.